Well, thank you guys for coming out here to Mayhurst. As Ray said, my wife and I, Casey, we moved here 3 years ago, and we were just, when we first saw Mayhurst, we were amazed at how beautiful it is. And that was really the reason why, main reason why we moved to this area. We're not originally from the area, but again, we were fascinated by the area. It's a little weird, me standing up here telling you about Mayhurst, and the reason is because many of you know more about Mayhurst than I do. Many of you have way more stories than I do. And so I did a lot of digging and a lot of reading, articles, books, and that nature to find out more and more about the property. And there's really still so much more to learn about the property that and I'll go through this later, but there's still a lot of questions that I have that maybe some of you can help me answer with Mayhurst and John Willis and some of the other owners that have lived here. I've been on a quest to find as many pictures as I can. There's really only one picture that we have in our possession of an old picture of the interior of Mayhurst. So that's it. That's all that we have. And there's really not that many. There's probably maybe 8 or 10 pictures that we have of the exterior of Mayhurst over the years. So there's not a lot. And one of the things that we've noticed is that whenever we have folks from the area come here, a lot of times they'll say, I've lived here my whole life and I've never been up here. And so Mayhurst in some regards seems like a hidden gem of Orange County. And so we're just thankful to be able to share it with you guys. Before we get started, I want to do a couple things. I want to find out who has lived in Orange County the longest.
1937.
1937. Can anybody beat 1937? It's one of our Mayhurst mugs. Okay. The second one is, who has lived in a house in the area the longest? In a single house the longest? Anybody more than 3 years?
Oh, yeah.
13 years. 13? Anybody beat that?
44.
44 years?
44.
Anybody beat 44?
1976.
That's ahead of us.
Yeah.
When was that? How many years is that?
47. You, Phil?
Yeah.
47.
In the same house, yeah.
Yeah, same house. Okay. This is one of our Mayhurst ornaments. All right.
Thank you.
Well, good. Well, thank you guys again. Like I said, one of the things that we love when we moved here is to hear stories of generations of people who have lived here their whole life and know the area well. And so you guys have been very welcoming to us. This is the most welcoming place we've ever lived. And we consider ourselves fortunate to live here. Well, I want to show you a couple things before I get started that will help you tie in a few things throughout the talk. I want to see if you can find the connection. Some of you will know the connection right away. Some of you, it will take you a little bit as we go on to see the connection. One of the things is this portrait here. This is a portrait of Robert E. Lee at the christening of A.P. Hill here in the red of his daughter Lucy, and that took place in the main foyer of Mayhurst. The other thing is this gravy bowl right here. Now, I'm just showing you these things. I'm not going to tell you anything about them yet. And then the other thing that we have found, and I know you probably can't see this very well, but it's up here. It's a decorative wood carved molding. And then the last thing is this book, which may throw a lot of you off, The Call of the Wild. What does Mayhurst have to do with Jack London's book, The Call of the Wild? We'll find out in a few minutes. So, without further ado, let me get into some of the architectural features of Mayhurst. What makes Mayhurst so unique? Mayhurst is one of the finest examples of Italianate architecture in Virginia, if not the United States. It's one of the things that drew us to the building, is the architecture of it. The huge corbels, the bracketing system, the exterior, the palladium windows, the huge cupola, or the belvedere, some may call it. Mayhurst is over 9,000 square feet, 5 stories tall, 22 rooms, 9 bedrooms, 13 bathrooms, 12 working fireplaces, a grand oval staircase, an English basement, 3 feet thick brick foundation, and a 10-inch air gap around the entire house that you can see from the attic. That my boys have fished out a few things that have fallen in there. Mayhurst has 5 balconies, and it has 72 windows of various shapes and sizes, with over 75% of the original wavy glass. It has palladium windows, small rectangular windows, to round windows, and half-round windows. Not to mention that we have all the screens for the windows. Now, we don't put them in, but we have them all. And not to mention the round windows on the ends, they open. Not currently, but they used to open. They went up into the walls, which was really fascinating. And then on top is the grand cupola that sits atop the home. And at the top of the cupola, in the windows, there is what is believed to have been a soldier who was stationed there on lookout, his initials that he carved into the glass at the top of the cupola, Thomas Rawlings. The exterior of Mayhurst, a lot of people say, is that stone? What is that exterior? Well, it's actually oak paneling, and it's from the ashlar stone pattern, basically. And it's the same exterior as Mount Vernon. So if you see Mount Vernon, same type of exterior. The interior of Mayhurst has 9 and 10-foot ceilings, and it has almost all the original marble fireplace mantles. And it still has the original random width oak floors. So my wife and I have renovated several homes, but this was the first one where I actually had to hammer in the blacksmith nails because they were coming up from the floors, which was pretty neat. Mayhurst still has the original shutters on the inside, so almost all the windows has the full-length shutters that bifold to cover the windows, which is, again, incredible. If you know anything about old homes, keeping stuff that's original is hard to do. Now, one of the most unique aspects of Mayhurst is its preservation. Now, a lot of times when you go to old houses, they may have 1 outbuilding, maybe 2. But one of the unique things about Mayhurst is it has so many of its original outbuildings. Mayhurst still has its original summer kitchen. It still has the original smokehouse with the hooks still hanging. It has the original barn on just over the boxwood hedge. And then Mayhurst has something unique that a lot of places don't have, and that is the original schoolhouse. So the Willis family, which had 8 children, they hired a teacher, and that cottage right on the other side of the boxwood hedge, you can't see, is the original schoolhouse that the Willis children were taught in. And so the fact that all these buildings still remain makes Mayhurst extremely unique. And on the property, there's also the pump house, an old brick cistern, and the remains of other cabins throughout the property. So it's just an incredible place to explore. But here's the mystery. Who was the architect? Who was the architect of Mayhurst? Now, I've looked and I've asked, and nobody seems to know. There seems to be 2 people that it's narrowed down to. Charles Haskins and Norris G. Starkweather. Now, my belief and other people's belief is it was Norris G. Starkweather. How many of you have ever heard of the house Camden House up in Maryland? Camden House is one of the most, it's the house closest like Mayhurst. And I have pictures and stuff up here if you're interested in those houses. And so that's what I believe, Norris G. Starkweather. It's extremely similar. Even the staircase in Camden is the same as it is inside Mayhurst. And so it is pretty fascinating. Now, when and where did all this begin? When and where did Mayhurst begin? Well, perhaps the first thing is the name, Mayhurst. Is that what it was called? No, Mayhurst, in the first 70 years of this existence, this was called Howard Place, not Mayhurst. It wasn't called Mayhurst until probably around 1920 when the Crenshaws owned it. I'll get to that later. But it's hard to decide where to begin the story of Mayhurst. Perhaps it's best to begin with the man who had the vision for this beautiful house. Colonel John Willis, who grew up at Woodley, was President James Madison's great-nephew and had Mayhurst constructed in 1859 on the land that he bought from Charles P. Howard, hence why it was called Howard Place. So John Willis bought this property from Charles P. Howard. Charles P. Howard was a good friend of the family. In fact, he was such a good friend that John Willis, who had Mayhurst built, referred to him as Uncle Howard. Charles P. Howard was also the pallbearer at Madison's funeral. And that's why Mayhurst was originally called the Howard Place. John Willis's mother, who was she? She was a pretty significant figure. John Willis's mother, Nellie Conway Willis, who was very well known at the time, was the daughter of James Madison's brother, Ambrose, and was named after James Madison's mother, who had the same name. John Willis's mother was the favorite niece of President Madison. That's one thing I was told when we moved here, that John Willis's mother, favorite niece of President Madison. Well, I wanted to find out if that was true, and so I dug and found out that she spent and lived a lot of her years at Mount Pillier. Not only that, but she was by Madison's bedside when he spoke his last words. And she was left over 200 acres by James Madison in his will. So I would imagine she probably was his favorite. John Willis also spent a lot of his time at Mount Pillier as well. In fact, he was recorded as having dinner at Mount Pillier with Lafayette, John Adams, Thomas Jefferson, and James Monroe, and others. And Willis was also there in October of 1878 to welcome Rutherford B. Hayes years later to visit Mount Pillier, which is fitting that his final resting place is in the Madison family cemetery, just yards away from Madison himself. But before Mayhurst, John Willis built, anybody know what house John Willis built before Mayhurst? Rockwood. He built Rockwood. And Rockwood in 1848, which was a beautiful Swiss chalet type house with wood siding that to this day has never been painted. And in 1859, Willis then had Mayhurst built. And this was to be his crowning achievement and his final home, or so he thought. I want to read something to you. I have a couple things that I want to refer to because there's so much really good information and really good articles out there that I want to make sure you hear it from people much smarter than I am. So one of the things from this article here, I believe this is from James A.D. Cox. He said, Colonel John Willis, he was an officer in the militia, continued to acquire land. In 1850, his mother conveyed some 800 acres to him. And in 1856, he purchased a home nearby, Howard Place. By 1860, having sold Rockwood, he and his family moved into the new house he had built next to the old one at Howard Place. This is a house now called Mayhurst. So that was where, that's where Willis began with Mayhurst. Well, what about Mayhurst's impact or maybe influence, or what was an involvement in the Civil War? In the winter of 1863, Howard Place became the headquarters of 18,000 troops and A.P. Hill. A.P. Hill set up his headquarters and stayed here on the grounds with his men, setting up his tent, as I'm told, in the front lawn. And that's when the story of this gravy bowl comes in. Now, in 2012, National Geographic did a dig here. They had a show called Diggers. And they did a dig here, and they found a bunch of stuff on the property, and they cataloged it all really well. And one of the things that they found was this gravy bowl, and they found it under, the tree's no longer there, but they found it under the tree where there's believed to be a picture of A.P. Hill's tent. And what they had said is that this could be AP Hill's mess from his mess set. Now, I don't know. I'm just conveying to you what I have been told, and it's a pretty significant piece if that's true. Nonetheless, that's where that comes in. So, what else happened here? Well, Mayhurst has had several notable guests, including Stonewall Jackson and Robert E. Lee. And let me read you this here from an article that I have found. It says, nearly 2 years earlier, General Stonewall Jackson's cavalry was in the Orange area fighting the Federal cavalry on Main Street on August 2nd, 1862. He remained in Orange for about a week. On August 6th, the Willis household noticed a man seated and resting on their gatepost, which I'm told is that gatepost right there is still the one. Someone is sent out to offer assistance to the man. It is General Stonewall Jackson, who is invited to stay the night, and he accepts. Two of Jackson's biographers, Robert Crick and James Robertson Jr., confirm that he spent the night at the home of Mr. Willis, 3/4 of a mile south of town. 3 days later, while marching from Orange to Culpeper, General Jackson encounters General Pope and defeats him in the Battle of Cedar Mountain. Now, Robert E. Lee, as we see here, he came down to be involved in the christening of A.P. Hill's daughter, Lucy McGraw Hill. And so that's what that picture is from as well. And there is actually a story. Here's another story. This is an interesting story. This is probably one of the first stories I was told when we came here. The story that brings the war to the front door of Mayhurst. In Major D. Humphrey's book, Heroes and Spies of the Civil War, Captain Magruder relates the scene at Orange Courthouse on August 2nd. When General Jones took the 7th and 12th down there from Gordonsville, having heard the Bluecoats were moving that way, they scattered 1/3 of our men in the rear, while those in the front did not know what was the matter in the rear and drove their lines out of the town. General Jones said afterwards that half of his men charged and half discharged on the grounds about the residence of Colonel Willis in the south side of town. On a hill, many of our scattered men gathered, seeing which General Jones ordered me to take a squad and bring the men down into the town and reorganize them. He ordered the killing then and there of any man who failed to obey the order. As I approached the house, about 50 men were standing in front of it. On the porch there stood a pretty and noble-looking girl, Miss Willis, who was urging the men to go to their command and do their duty. As I came up, I heard her say, "Oh, I wish I was a man," when one fellow, who had been down in the fire, said, "Yes, miss, and if you was, you wish you was a gal again mighty soon." This brought down the house, and I brought down the men. Neat story. So in 1867, just 8 years after Willis built Mayhurst, he was forced to sell Mayhurst as he was unable to pay the taxes which were left unpaid to the Union during wartime. Still there?
Yep.
So this was one of the sad facts of that Willis sold Mayhurst just a few years after they owned it. And then the next owner was Latham Higgins. There's not much known about Latham Higgins, at least not much that I could find, other than that he was believed to have been the county clerk at Orange County at the time, and he was the brother-in-law of Judge Hiram Bond. Now, Judge Hiram Bond was the judge at this time in Orange. He eventually went on to become the Secretary of Bankruptcy in Richmond. And then, after that, him and his sons went to Santa Clara, California. Him and his sons, Marshall was one of his sons, they went on to Santa Clara, California, and then his sons went on to the Yukon to the gold rush. And they rented out cabins. That's when they met Jack London. And their dog, you guys know the story if you know from the Call of the Wild, the dog Buck. Well, Jack London, in exchange for doing chores, he got to stay in one of the cabins. Now, he got to also use the dog when he was doing his chores, became very fond of him. And actually, I have a letter from Jack London to Marshall asking if he can use the story of the dog and his father, who in the book is Miller. I think that's right. Might be wrong. But it's Judge Hiram Bond who is here, who lived here at Mayhurst. And so that's the connection. It's a loose connection, but it's still a connection. That the book, as far as the dog never lived here. That would be cool. But the dog never lived here. But the judge did. And so that's a neat little story as well. So then in 1902, one of the most notable families purchased Mayhurst, the Crenshaws. They purchased Mayhurst and 600 acres of land for $26,000. That was a deal. $26,000. The Crenshaws added several of the bathrooms. They also added a conservatory. If you look at this picture here, this is when all the trim of Mayhurst was painted that green color. And over here is the conservatory that they added. So the Crenshaws were the ones that added the conservatory. In fact, there's an old picture right here. Here's one of William G. Crenshaw standing out in front of Mayhurst. And then there's another picture of the Crenshaw family standing out here. The wife is on the porch in a rocking chair, and the two men are on the side with the dog, with their hunting dog. And that was before they had the conservatory built. Now the Crenshaws are notable because he changed the name to Mayhurst. He named it after his wife at the time, May, and that picture is down below. But he named it after his wife, May Crenshaw. Now, May was her name, and then Hurst is basically means a wooded rise. And so that's when you see the name in the deed book first changed to Mayhurst, is when the Crenshaws owned it. Now, in 1932, perhaps my favorite owners, Frank and Olive Daniel, purchased Mayhurst for $19,000 and 447 acres. Frank and Olive Daniel were the longest owners of Mayhurst. They owned it for 55 years. In fact, here's a great picture. Here's a great picture of Frank on one of his horses. And some of you know Frank or knew him, and you got stories. I didn't know Frank. I wish I did. But I love hearing the stories about him. Every story I've heard, he was a great man, did a lot of great things, and served a lot of people. And one of the things that Frank did while he was here is that he really made Mayhurst into Mayhurst Dairy. And so we received this, and I don't have the card that it came with. Oh, actually I do. We received this in the mail about a year after we moved here from Miss Betty Farrand. And she gave us a receipt that was given to her father in 1935 from the Mayhurst Dairy Farm, Miss F.B. Daniel, for 2 half pints of cream for 30 cents and 7 pounds of butter. Paid. That was a neat thing that we got to see. There's actually still, in the barn, there's still the sign that says Mayhurst Dairy Farm, or Mayhurst Farm. And it has Frank and Olive Daniel's names at the top. So that's been preserved in the barn. And so we're just excited to get to see some of that history still preserved. In fact, we had a guest who was a relative of Frank, who brought us Frank's 22 that he had while he was here at Mayhurst. It was passed down to him, and he thought that it should be here at Mayhurst. And so we have it in our cabinet inside the foyer there, the dining room. We have a nice cabinet that shows some of the history of Mayhurst. But Frank and Olive Daniel owned it for a very long time. In fact, Mayhurst really only had 9 owners to this day. And it's pretty remarkable that it's only been 9 owners. And to me, some of you guys, that might be a lot with Virginian history. But nonetheless, Mayhurst has been well preserved by its owners. It's been well cared for. That's a significant part of why so much of it has been preserved. So I want to end with this. Whatever happened to John Willis? John Willis is an interesting guy. This is him down here. Whatever happened to John Willis when he left Mayhurst? John Willis's life began with great hope and promise, and Mayhurst was the pinnacle of his life. When Willis lost Mayhurst in 1867, his wife Lucy died the next year. So he lost Mayhurst. His wife dies, and she's buried at the Madison Family Cemetery as well. Her tombstone reads, "Lord, give us help in time of trouble, for vain is the help of man." In 1868, Willis went on to build another home in adjacent land called Oakburn, which was next to Tomahawk Creek, which is down the road. And unfortunately, due to continued financial hardship, he had to move from Oakburn just 9 years after he built it, and eventually moved into a small cabin where he is believed to have spent his last remaining days. And that's what I want to read to you a part here from, there's a great article, perhaps one of the best, I think, from H.B. Thomas. It's called "The Full Tide of Prosperity," Colonel John Willis and his Orange County houses. And here's what he writes. "For Colonel Willis, the sale of Oakburn brought to an end whatever may have been left of the full tide of prosperity. He was without a home of his own and without any possibility of building again. Subsequent sales of his property had resulted in complete financial loss. There have been stories that Colonel Willis, alone and destitute, died in a small cabin some years later. But a version recently learned, and from a knowledgeable source, seems quite credible, and as an ending happier than one might otherwise have been led to expect. Colonel Willis, according to this version, apparently did live and die in a cabin, but it was a cabin on the farm, Clifton, of his old friend and companion, Colonel Garrett Scott, whose son, it would be recalled, had married Willis's daughter. Quite possibly in these surroundings and among friends, family, Colonel John Willis died in the winter of 1885. He is buried in the Madison Family Cemetery at Montpelier next to his wife, and not far from the graves of his father and his great-uncle James Madison. A small and simple stone carries the inscription, John Willis, born January 8, 1810, died December 9, 1885. So that is an interesting part and end for John Willis, who had really this great vision of such a grand and great house that we get to enjoy, and that my wife and I have the privilege to be in the stewards of for however long we can. And we are thankful to be here. We're thankful for the history. We're thankful for the owners that have went before us to preserve it. And we're thankful for you guys and your interest in Mayhurst. So I want to direct you guys up here. There's some various articles and other pictures that we have. Help yourself, look around. We still have some water left. And if you have any questions, you can ask me. I don't know how much help I'll be, but I will answer anything that I can, and also my wife, Casey. But thank you all for coming. I appreciate you, and have a great rest of your day.